The Whispering Grove. Elliot Harper occupied a quiet cul-de-sac where houses stood like sentries, windows lighting up each evening like candles. His house, a two-story, peeling blue bungalow, adjoined Mr. Grayson's property, a low, gray bungalow with an always unruly lawn. Mr. Grayson was mysterious, a man in his 50s with a gaunt build, silver hair that hung in wisps above his eyes, and an aversion to speaking to anyone. Elliot, a homebound graphic designer, caught sight of his neighbor from his office window, emerging at dusk each day, toting a canvas tote bag slung over his shoulder, into the woods that bordered their subdivision. Initially, Elliot paid it no mind. The woods were a local gem, an impenetrable mass of oak and pine that ran for miles behind Willow Creek. Everyone walked there, kids played, and dogs were walked up and down its trails. But Mr. Grayson's forays were not like that. He never walked down the main trail, always shortcutting down into a slender break in the underbrush, moving furtively, as if trained to do so. Elliot picked up on the timing, invariably just at sunset, streaking color into the sky in bruised purples. And he was always back hours afterward, his pack heavy, his face ashen, as if he'd witnessed something that drained his life force. Elliot's curiosity gnawed at him. He was not nosy, but whatever rhythm Mr. Grayson's adventures took, it was wrong, like a metronome that was slightly offbeat. One evening, sitting by his window, nursing coffee, he watched Mr. Grayson emerge, dressed in a long coat in the warm September evening air. The bag was clutched in his hand, bulging strangely, and Elliot glimpsed something metallic as Mr. Grayson repositioned his hold on it. A knife? A gadget? His heart beat faster. He told himself it was nothing. Perhaps the man was an herbalist, or a forager, bringing back wild greens and caps of fungi. But something about it did not feel correct. Elliot watched closer for the next week, recording times: 7:03 p.m. leaving, 10:47 p.m. coming back, give or take a couple of minutes. He caught Mr. Grayson once stopping at the tree line and looking back, as though he felt he was being watched. Their eyes locked for an instant, and Elliot huddled behind his blind, his heart racing. Mr. Grayson's eyes were empty, like two wells that reflected no light. Elliot lay awake that evening, feeling as though he heard every creak of his house as he listened for footsteps outside. By Friday, curiosity turned to obsession. He had to know what Mr. Grayson was up to. The woods were not that far, a 10-minute hike to where the main path started in the clearing. He could trail, just to look, and be home before anyone missed him. The notion was reckless, but living next door to an enigma that darkened with each passing day was worse. He took his flashlight, coat, and phone, reassuring himself it was just an evening walk, nothing more. The air was cool that evening, heavy with scent of pine and damp soil. Elliot lingered until Mr. Grayson's figure disappeared into the trees, whereupon he slipped from his back door. The opening in the brush was not difficult to locate, identifiable by flattened ferns and faint path trodden into the ground. His flashlight cast an unsteady beam, picking up roots and rocks. The trees were quiet, aside from an occasional rustling of leaves or distant hoot of an owl. He took slow, cautious steps, keeping at a distance, following the slight crunch of Mr. Grayson's footsteps ahead of him. The trail wound deeper than he'd anticipated, trees thickening, branches interlacing above him. His phone lost signal completely, and air grew colder, heavy with an acrid, metallic scent. 20 minutes of walking, and he caught sight of a glimmer of light up ahead, a small, orange candle-like flame. He doused his flashlight, moving ahead quietly. The candle-like flame was within a small pocket of grass, where Mr. Grayson crouched before a ring of rocks. There were candles burning outside the ring, their flames abnormally still despite the wind. In the center stood a figure, made of wood, crudely formed, features indistinct but broadly human. Mr. Grayson was speaking, his voice low and chanting, words Elliot could not discern. Elliot's gut twisted. This wasn't foraging, or hiking. Something old and wrong, something else, was going on. He huddled by a tree, his breathing shallow. Mr. Grayson dug into his satchel, pulling out something small and dark, a coiled mass of feathers and bone, bound in twine. He set it in the ring, and the air began to vibrate, a low sound that made his teeth hurt. The candle's flames leaped higher, and for an instant, he imagined he could see movement inside them, forms that weren't reflected in anything he could perceive. He longed to run, but his legs were stuck to the ground. Mr. Grayson stood, head cocked as if he was hearing something. He turned, his eyes fixed on where Elliot was concealed behind the tree. The man's face was impassive, but his stare was unblinking, as if he could look right through the bark. Elliot breathed silently, praying that nothing could be seen behind him. Mr. Grayson turned back to the ring, continuing to chant. Elliot retreated, his heart racing, and ran back the way he came. Back home, he bolted his doors and huddled in darkness, the sight of the rock ring seared into his brain. What was Mr. Grayson up to? And why did the woods seem to be watching him as he fled? Elliot hardly slept that evening. His slumber was broken, filled with flashes of wavering candles and a distant, sonorous recitation that seemed to emanate from the walls. His waking up was to be greeted by his heartbeat alone, as the room lay darkened in morning's hush. The image of the clearing stuck to him like wet cloth. He attempted to concentrate on work, drawing logos for a client, but his tremulous fingers smeared the lines. He kept looking out of the window every couple of minutes, half expecting to catch Mr. Grayson's face gazing back at him. By noon, he simply couldn't tolerate it any longer. He required answers. He thought about calling the police but discarded it as an idea. What could he possibly report? His neighbor burning candles in the woods? He took his car to the local library, which was an old, red-brick building just outside of town. The librarian, Mrs. Whitaker, was a sweet woman who loved local history. If anyone would know something about bizarre ritual in Willow Creek, it would be her. The library was hushed, filled with scents of old paper and smooth wood. Mrs. Whitaker nodded as Elliot told her what he'd witnessed, leaving out the trespassing detail. Her face became solemn, her fingers tapping against the counter. She took him to a corner in back, where books on local legends stood on the shelf. She opened a slim book, its cover worn, titled Legends of Willow Creek. "There's a legend about these woods," she said, speaking quietly. "Few mention it these days." The book told of a legend of the 1800s, when pioneers had settled in the region. They told of a glade in the depths of the forest, where air hung heavy and trees seemed to whisper to one another. They said it was inhabited by spirits, old, nameless creatures that required offerings to keep the ground fertile. There were those who left it grains or carved totems as an offering, and others, in hopes of gaining favor, left it blood. The rituals were brought to an end by a fire that destroyed part of the wood, but the glade stood, untouched and secreted. Mrs. Whitaker closed the book. "They claim it's just legend, but I've heard strange things. Hikers lost, hearing voices. Be careful, Elliot." He walked off with the book cradled under his arm, his thoughts spinning. Was Mr. Grayson attempting to placate these spirits? Something worse? That same evening, he observed the bungalow once more. Mr. Grayson appeared at 7:03, as always, bag in tow. Elliot did not pursue this time. He could not bring himself to do it. He sat in his window, book open on his lap instead. The pages spoke of symbols cut into trees, rings of rocks, and offerings that grew increasingly ominous by year's end. One section gave him chills. "The spirits do not sleep. They observe, and they claim what is given, or what is not. The woods were more vocal that evening. A distant thrum, reminiscent of what he'd heard within the clearing, vibrated beyond his walls. He double-checked his locks, closed the curtains, and attempted to sleep. At about midnight he stirred to sound, a gentle, staccato tapping, as of fingers upon glass. From within reach of the back door. He tiptoed downstairs, knife in hand, and stared anxiously through the peephole. Nothing, just nothing, lay beyond. The tapping ceased, but as he turned his head, something scraped against wood, slow and deliberate. The following morning, he discovered marks upon his back door, slight, claw-like scratches, too high to be from an animal. His heart plummeted. Had Mr. Grayson caught him in the woods? Or something else? He spent his day scouring online, uncovering fragmented forum posts about Willow Creek. One user, anonymous, referenced the grove that listens, and cautioned not to venture within at night. One person wrote of seeing shadows that moved independently of light. The posts were years old, the users long gone. Elliot's fear intensified, but also his resolve. He could not deny this. He purchased an inexpensive camera, the type used by hikers, and attached it to his jacket. If he was going back, he'd be able to prove it. That afternoon, he waited until Mr. Grayson departed, tracked him again, camera running. The trees were darker this time, their air thicker, as though the trees were also keeping quiet, holding their breath. The clearing came into sight sooner, its path known to him. Mr. Grayson was waiting, kneeling, his incantation stronger, more desperate. The wooden statue was no longer there, an oil-slicked, larger one in its place, its surface dark and shiny, as though covered in oil. Elliot's camera zoomed in closer. The ring of rocks was larger, covered in fresh symbols cut into them, spirals and jagged lines that stung to behold. Mr. Grayson remained still, one of his hands cradling a small container, its contents glinting red in the candle flame. Blood? Elliot's gut twisted. He took one step back, cracking the sound of a twig underfoot. Mr. Grayson spun, head jerked towards the noise. Elliot huddled back, his heart in his throat. The chanting halted, and air thickened, and that low thrum swelled to become like screaming in his bones. He ran, not bothering to be stealthy, branches shredding his clothes. At home, he double-checked the door and viewed the footage. Blurry, distorted sound, but clear as crystal were the symbols. And in one image, just for an instant, something shifted behind Mr. Grayson, a shadow with no clear source, tall and lean, its edges fluttering like smoke. Elliot's hands shook as he rewound the recording. The figure in the background wasn't human, it was too tall, too smooth, like watercolor in water. He stopped it, fixed on the screen, his face white in the screen's light. The markings on the rocks were identical to those in the book in his library, although the book hadn't said what they were used for. They were summoning something, or binding it? He didn't know, but his house's air was wrong, as if it were watching him. He stayed indoors for 2 days, curtains closed. But the noises continued, the knocks at night, claw marks on walls, and one time, an indistinct whisper, like voices running into one another, from nowhere. He obsessed about checking his locks, slept under lights, and never let go of his camera. Mr. Grayson went about his routine, steadfast, his figure disappearing into the woods every evening. Elliot wished to confront him, but the recollection of his empty eyes forbade it. This was not an occasion he could pursue. On the 3rd day, he backtracked to the library. Mrs. Whitaker was not there, but a pale, light-jacketed student clerk who knew nothing of folklore even existed. Elliot poked about in the book again, coming upon mention of the Groove's Call, a draw that brought individuals to the glade, left them feeling seen, being watched. The text cautioned that to ignore it was fatal. The spirits became irritable. looking for souls in whom to confide their secrets. Elliot's flesh crawled. Was it that which pursued him? That which made him feel he was being watched even yet? He drove back home, book nestled in his passenger seat. That night, he observed Mr. Grayson departing, but something was off. The man no longer carried any bag, only his lantern that painted the surroundings in a wan yellow hue. Elliot's fear waged against his curiosity. If he did not interfere, the noises could get worse, the shadows get closer. He took his camera and trailed after, breathing shallow, that air colder than it ought to be. The clearing path was quiet, its usual sound of nocturnal life absent. The trees were closer, branches reaching up like bony fingers. When he entered the clearing, Mr. Grayson stood there, not kneeling as before. The ring of rocks was not there, but one large, smooth slab, glinting back at him, reflecting the light of the lantern. The figure made of wood was bigger than before, its surface glinting, pulsing nearly, and Mr. Grayson's voice was as low as thunder, his words beyond his language, yet recognizable, like something he used to know but had forgotten. He filmed from behind one of the trees, zooming in on the slab. Its surface was not stone, it rippled, faintly, as if it were alive. Mr. Grayson lifted the lantern, and the light picked up etching on the figure, the same spirals and lines as the stones. The air shook, the hum strong enough to blur Elliot's eyesight. He was clinging to the tree, dizzy, as it seemed to tilt to one side. And then he caught sight of them, shadows, dozens, moving in one direction or another, indistinct but moving as if with intent. Grayson turned, his eyes meeting Elliot's position of concealment. This time, he did not look aside. His mouth curved up into a thin, knowing smile, and he lifted one hand, in beckoning invitation. Elliot's legs took him before he could halt them, into the clearing. The whir filled his head, silencing thought. He ground his teeth to turn about, but his limbs wouldn't obey him. The shadows closed in, their edges caressing his flesh, cold and wet like wet silk. He let the camera drop, the lens cracking on a root. Mr. Grayson's voice boomed, the words clearer now, not words, but names, countless names said in reverence. The slab glowed, and Elliot's eyes detected faces in its surface, twisted, screaming, imprisoned. He stumbled backward, shattering the spell, and fled, shadows following him, their voices like knives in his ear. He never stopped running until he was inside his home, slamming and locking the door behind him, falling back against it, gasping for air. The camera remained behind, left in the trees, but he did not care. He could not return. The whispers came inside also, muted but insistent, saying his name. He looked at his phone, no reception, no means to dial for assistance. The book on his table was open, a line underlined in writing he could not recall. The grove takes what it wants. Elliot stayed indoors for days. He phoned in an excuse, dismissed emails, and left lights off, not wanting to attract notice. The whispers grew more urgent at night, echoing in and from behind walls, taking on words he just could not catch up to. His nightmares were worse, visions of the slab, its surface rippling with faces that pleaded to be let out. Mr. Grayson, as well, appeared to him, standing tall, his eyes empty pits, voice a mantra that tugged at Elliot's soul. He attempted to look further, but his internet cut out, the screen emitting static as it flickered. His library book remained his only information source, pages annotated with writing he never remembered doing, maps of spirals, scribbles like, "They see you," in the margins of the book. He discovered an entry on offerings. The spirits required offerings, and anyone who entered uninvited became part of it. A chill ran down his veins thinking about it. Had he invited this by continuing to pursue Mr. Grayson? On the fifth evening, tapping began again, sounder, more demanding. From every window, Every door came a symphony of ghostly fingers. He grabbed his book, reading wildly. The last pages told of a ritual to placate spirits, blood, bone, and an oath of silence. Resistance meant becoming bound to the grove. A fate left unspecified but unutterably frightening. Elliot's hands trembled as he read. He was no ritualist. He did not accept spirits. But scratches on his walls, voices in his ear, were not illusions. He determined to confront Mr. Grayson. It was foolish, but he could not go on, pursued by specters. At twilight he rapped on the bungalow door, his heart racing. There was no answer. The windows were unlit, the house still. He turned the knob, it opened. There was stale air inside, thick with the scent of dirt and candle wax. The living room was empty, aside from one table strewn with candles, whose tapers were charred. A map of the forest lay unfolded, the clearing circled in red. Elliot shouted, his voice ringing out. No answer. He discovered an entrance to the basement, its doorway scratched like his own. He went down, air that chilled, the thrum of the woods now booming in his breast. The cellar was an altar, a shrine of figures that were exquisitely carved into walls, jars of dark liquid, and bones that were patterned upon the ground. In the middle was a mirror, its face rippling like that of the slab. Elliot's reflection greeted him, but his eyes were not correct, hollow, like Mr. Grayson's eyes. He ran up to his room, closing the door violently behind him. When he staggered outside, he caught sight of Mr. Grayson on the verge of the forest, staring at him. The man remained silent, simply gesturing toward the trees. Elliot ran back home, barricading himself inside. The whispering was deafening, calling his name, calling upon him to go back. He set the book alight, attempting to sever the link, but the fire only set the shadows to dancing upon his walls. That evening, he grabbed a bag, ready to get out of town. But as he headed for his car keys, the lights began to flicker, and the air thickened. His door swung open, showing him the woods behind, nearer than they ought to be. The clearing was within sight of his porch, its candles burning, the slab glowing. Mr. Grayson stood next to it, his grin spreading, his arm extended. Elliot stood still on his porch, his eyes filled with the heavy scent of dirt and rot in the evening air. There shouldn't be any sign of the clearing. The wood was too distant from his home. But it was there, glowing like an oasis, the candles burning steadily, the slab pulsing with its wavering faces. Mr. Grayson's dark shape was an ink blot against the illumination, his extended hand still, inviting. The whispers were not whispers anymore, they were deafening, an uproar, an army of voices that tore at Elliot's head, drawing him closer. He attempted to close it, but it wouldn't budge, as if the house itself was not willing to allow him to stay inside. His keys fell from his grasp, rattling to the ground. The trees appeared to be breathing, their borders moving closer, their branches inclining inwards. He took an involuntary jump back, stumbled across the doorstep, and landed on the grass. The ground was spongy, impossibly spongy, as if it could swallow him up. He leaped up onto his feet, gasping, and fled not to the car, but from it down into the cul-de-sac. The street was still, houses dark, windows empty. He kicked down doors, calling for aid, but no voice replied. The streetlights trembled, casting shifting shadows that seemed to move where they shouldn't move. He looked back. The glade was still there, nearer, and its candles were burning, agleam. Mr. Grayson had not shifted, but his smile grew wider, his eyes glinting like polished rock. Elliot's legs seared as he ran towards town, the murmurs following him, coalescing into words. You've seen. You know. You belong. His phone was dead, screen dark. The road ran on and on, the trees alongside it branching out to the left and to the right. reaching to close and like an archway. He stumbled, falling, his palms scraping against the asphalt. Looking up, he saw ahead of him, closing off the road, that slab, glowing, the figures cut into it twisting. Grayson moved closer, his voice measured. "You shouldn't have tailed," he told him, his tones slicing above the buzz. "They don't like to be observed." Elliot struggled to speak, to plead, but his throat closed on itself, his voice lost. The shadows of the glade closed in upon him now, taking on shape. Tall figures, impossibly thin, faces that rippled, eyes that blazed. They tugged at him, cold hands drawing him to the slab. He struggled, scrabbling at the ground, but it gave beneath him, loose like mud. The slab was against his face, its surface reflected pain. His face, among several, was screaming soundlessly within it. Mr. Grayson crouched down next to him, his face nearly full of pity. "They require you," he told him, "as they required me." The shadows closed in tighter, and Elliot sank, feeling the surface of the slab closing up behind him. His final sight was of Mr. Grayson disappearing into the distance, his lantern fading, its beam being engulfed by the trees. Several days passed, and the cul-de-sac lay still. Elliot's home was empty, his vehicle untouched. Neighbors spoke of his disappearance, but nobody spoke of the trees. Mr. Grayson continued his routine, making his evening visits into the trees, his pack heavier than before. In the clearing, the slab was once more smooth, its faces erased, but its air vibrated with an added voice, quiet and beseeching. The grove was content for the moment. The mirror on the other side. She was attracted to old stuff her whole life. Books that fell open when you touched them, jewelry that was oxidized and hidden in little red boxes, old pieces of furniture that groaned under the weight of years. So finding that mirror in her grandmother's Victorian estate's attic was like fate. The estate, which she'd inherited upon her grandmother's death, was a maze of memories, every room filled to bursting with trinkets of a life Eleanor hardly remembered. She was 32, alone, and beginning anew after her life as an urban professional in New York collapsed. The relocation to this groaning, ivy-covered old Vermont homestead was supposed to be an escape. The attic was filled with dust and shadows, illuminated by only one bulb hanging from an old cord. Eleanor spent most of the morning going through boxes when she uncovered something heavy covered in an old, moth-eaten sheet. She pulled back the covering to expose a full-length mirror, its frame adorned in intricate vines and flowers that curled into the air in the faint illumination. The glass was milky, streaked from years of use, but it was strangely compelling. Eleanor's reflection looked back, her dark locks falling in waves, her green eyes wide with curiosity. But something was wrong. The reflection stayed one moment back, as if it moved just slightly more slowly than she did. She ran her fingers down to run them along the carvings on the frame. They were warm to the touch, nearly pulsing, and a slight hum vibrated down into the wood, so slight that she wondered if she imagined it existed. Stepping back, she saw the base of the mirror was engraved with worn-out words, Speculum Veritatis. Latin, as near as she could remember, though her high school studies were rusty. Mirror of truth, maybe? The words gave her a chill, though she could not explain why. That evening, Eleanor pulled the mirror into her bedroom, standing it up against the wall facing her bed. She convinced herself that it was simply an odd antique, a talking point for the empty home. But as she lay in bed, it appeared to be watching her. The moon cast its rays through the windows, catching in the glass and causing it to glint like liquid silver. She rolled over, pulling up the covers tight, but slumber was slow to catch up, interrupted by nightmares of her image emerging from the mirror, smiling with an abnormally wide mouth. The following morning, Eleanor stood in front of the mirror, combing her hair. Her image replicated her exactly, until it did not. For an instant, her reflection wore something else, an expensive, well-cut business suit, not the wrinkled pullover Eleanor wore that day. The environment also shifted, revealing an active office, not her messy bedroom. She blinked, and the image cleared up instantly. Her heart was racing. Had it been in her head? She reached up to touch the glass, half hoping it to ripple, but it felt firm to her fingertips, cold to the touch. The mirror's peculiarness increased in the following days. Each time Eleanor gazed into it, she caught glimpses of other lives. She was an artist, her hands in rich pigments, her face aglow in sunlight, standing in one, her hair gray, surrounded by unknown kids, in another. They were vivid, nearly tangible, visions as if stepping into them, becoming that other Eleanor, was possible. They were tempting, these alternate versions of herself, happier, more fulfilled, leading lives that were once her fantasies. There was, however, always an instant, just as the vision disappeared, when her reflection's eyes locked into hers, and they sparkled with an unspoken understanding, as if sharing a secret that was not yet clear to her. By week's end, Eleanor was fixated. She stood for hours in front of the mirror, observing these alternate lives like old movies. She imagined being a physician, a world traveler, even an hermit in a solitary cabin in front of a lake that was locked in winter. Each life imagined felt like part of her, choices she'd never made. But the allure of the mirror was unnerving. She started to lose time, standing there until her legs were sore. Her face reflected back at her with an intensity that repelled her. One stormy evening, as windows shook, Eleanor stood in front of the mirror, her breathing misting on the glass. The reflection rippled, and she caught sight of herself in a darkened room, her face gaunt, her eyes empty. She was bound to a chair, her wrists raw and seeping blood. A figure stood behind her, its features obscured by shadows, and it grasped the glinting blade of a knife in its hand. Eleanor's heart halted. This wasn't a vision of success or of daring do. This was not a dream at all. Her reflected self looked up, and caught her eye, and mouthed one word, help. She stumbled back, gasping for air. The image disappeared, leaving behind only her shaking image. She covered up the mirror, swearing to turn her back on it. But as she rested in bed, it remained, the shackles, the knife, the panic in her own eyes. Was it an omen? A look into what might be? The mirror remained quiet, but its presence in the room was heavy and unescapable. She lay awake that evening. The storm raged, and the mirror vibrated, that low, relentless humming echoing off of her bones. Eleanor understood that she needed to break it, to run it into dust, and be rid of it once and for all. But something stayed her, an urge to know, to see if that abhorrent image was real, or something even worse. At dawn, gray and chill, Eleanor pulled back the covering from the mirror. Her image reflected back, plain, nondescript. But in one corner of the glass, for an instant, there stood the silhouette of someone watching back at her. Eleanor resisted looking into the mirror, but it was as futile as ignoring an aching tooth. Its presence nagged at her, drawing her back every time she walked by her bedroom door. She'd shoved it into a corner, tacked down behind an unopened box, but it was relentless in its draw. By the third day following the frightening sight of herself shackled and desperate, she succumbed. She needed to know what it meant. The mirror's bizarre visions, the alternate lives, had to be significant. Were they fantasies? Memories? Something evil? She stood in front of it, her reflected form unmoving at first. Then it changed. She was in a garden this time, dressed in a ball gown, laughing at someone she did not know. The atmosphere was idyllic, golden, but it was wrong. The man's grin was not quite kind, his eyes not quite warm. Eleanor's reflected self was unaware, but her actual heart was racing. She moved closer, and the image shifted once more. She was in bed, pallid and frail, beeping machinery surrounding her. Her reflected self's eyes were hollow, but they fixed on Eleanor's, as if begging for her to comprehend. She jotted down every vision in a notebook, searching for a clue to what it might mean. The painter, the physician, the reclusive figure near the lake, all felt like part of something that fitted together. But the visions that were dark, like that one with chains, preyed upon her worst fears. They came more often these days, more desolate than the last time before. In one, she walked alone in an empty city, buildings in ruins, ash-filled air that clouded her every breath. In another, she stood on a ledge, peering into an empty space that glared back at her. Each time, the look of her double's eyes seemed to carry a meaning she could not read. She turned to study the inscription on the mirror, Speculum Veritatis. A visit to the local library only turned up old texts in Latin, which spoke of mirrors as doors to fate or to truth, but nothing concrete. Internet discussion boards proved equally unhelpful, full of urban legend and conspiracy theories. One posting, deep in an about cursed objects thread, spoke of a mirror that reflected lives not lived. Its author said it drove its owner mad, but that was as much of the posting as was left, as though it stopped writing in mid-sentence. Eleanor closed her laptop, her flesh crawling. The hum of the mirror increased at dusk, as if it was coming from within the glass of the mirror itself. She covered it, but still, it continued to sound, invading even her sleep. She dreamed that she was every Eleanor at once, the painter, the doctor, and prisoner, each one of them crying to her to pick one of them. She woke up struggling, the face of the mirror glowing in the shadows, her image indistinguishable, though it was her, yet not quite. It was shorter-haired, harder-eyed. The other Eleanor cocked her head, as if looking upon her. Desperate for explanations, Eleanor phoned an antiques dealer, Mr. Hargrove, who was known to be familiar with old items and their histories. He came to her the following afternoon, a wiry man wearing spectacles balanced on his nose. He touched the mirror, running his fingers over the frame with an air of reverence that made Eleanor uncomfortable. "Old," he said, his voice hushed. "Older than this building, perhaps older than this town. The figures. They aren't just ornamentation. They're symbology, binding or protective. Where did you obtain it?" She explained to him about the attic, omitting the visions. Hargrove's eyes grew narrow. "Mirrors such as these, they are not uncommon. Others claim that they are windows, not to your image, but to what could be, or what may be." He stopped, looking at the glass. "Be cautious, Miss Eleanor. Mirrors do not lie, but sometimes do not reveal what you wish to see." She sat in front of the mirror, notebook in front of her, her voice shaking as she spoke to it. She felt like an idiot yet desperate. "What is it showing me? Why?" Her reflected self glared back, and then it gave way as if it were mist. She was running in a darkening wood, clothes ripped from something unknown behind her. Her reflected self was frightened, her breath misting in cold air. Behind her, movement shifted, formless but sentient. Eleanor's real hand pressed against glass as if to draw that one to safety. The sight dissipated, but the thrum grew, shaking her bones. That evening, she dreamed of the mirror once more. She was within it, in an empty, echoing corridor filled with rows of identical mirrors, each reflecting a different Eleanor, some smiling, some shattered, some gazing at her with unyielding, accusatory eyes. A voice spoke, just loud enough to be heard, though not clear, and it was heavy, like something piling up within her ribcage. She woke to be standing in front of the mirror, though she could not remember getting up from bed. Her reflection was fine, but the room behind it was off, too dark, too still, as if outside it, time had halted. Eleanor's days turned into one long blur of watching and waiting. She obsessed about the mirror. She gave up unpacking, stopped eating well. The visions were real to her now, every one drawing her further into its world. She was drowning in a lake of black, her fingers scrabbling at water that slid away from them. She was burning in a house of flames that licked at her face and arms. Each of them came to an end as her reflection's eyes locked onto hers, an unvoiced plea that left her shaking. By the 7th evening, Eleanor could no longer deny the mirror's summons. She stood in front of it, her notebook pressed to her bosom. "Show me," she breathed. The glass rippled, and she stood once again in that terrible room, chained, as the figure above her moved closer, dark and impenetrable. This time, however, the figure turned, its face hidden but its weight crushing. Her reflected self shrieked, and Eleanor felt the sound expanding in her own throat. The mirror's thrum grew into a bellow, and Eleanor understood with ghastly clarity that the vision was not simply potential, it was an approaching reality. Eleanor's life began to fray as the mirror's hold grew stronger. She stopped picking up calls, read no emails, and allowed the house to become chaotic. The mirror was reality to her now, its visions an ever-changing kaleidoscope of lives that might be or yet be possible to her. The more idyllic, like that of the painter or the traveler, were receding, giving way to grimmer visions that seeped into her every waking moment like damp rot. The chained Eleanor, the drowning Eleanor, the burning Eleanor, they haunted her waking moments, their eyes begging something she could not provide. She struggled to combat it. She relocated the mirror to the basement, closing it behind an imposing door. But the thrum pursued her, resonating in walls, humming in her teeth. She heard footsteps at night, slow and calculated, as if her reflections walked just beyond her line of sight. She gave up using her bedroom, huddling on the couch in the living room, but even there, the presence of the mirror remained, an unshakable weight in the atmosphere. Desperate, Eleanor turned to books once more. She pored over books of folklore and the history of the occult, searching for answers. One book, an old, worn volume of Victorian spiritualism, spoke of mirrors as gates to the other side. They were not merely glass, wrote the author, but portals to dimensions where possibilities impacted one another. Certain mirrors, imbued with intent or ritual, might catch fragments of an individual's soul, revealing to them truths that they were not yet prepared to confront. The book spoke of binding mirrors, objects that might draw their owners into what they reflected. Eleanor's hands trembled as she read. Was that what this mirror was doing? Drawing her to that chained, desperate image of self? She phoned Hargrove once more, begging him to remove the mirror from her sight. He wouldn't do it. "You've stared long enough," he said, his tone tight. "It's attached to you now. Shattering it could shatter you." He hung up before she could protest. Eleanor sat staring at the phone, her face indistinctly reflected in the dark screen. Even there, her eyes appeared wrong, too wide, too knowing. She could not help but return to the basement. On the 10th day, she opened the door and stood in front of the mirror once more. Its surface was cleaner now, nearly polished, as though it was stirred by her presence to life. Her image fluttered, revealing her in an empty field, her clothing tattered, her face streaked with dirt. Something stirred behind her in the image, a form that was nearly human, its arms too long, its movement jerky. Her mirrored image spun, as though it sensed it, and shrieked. Eleanor shrieked as well, her voice ripping from her throat. The image disappeared, but the thrum grew, vibrating the basement's rocky walls. She stumbled up to her room, closing the door behind her. But the influence of the mirror permeated the house. Things shifted when her back was turned, a book falling off a shelf, a cup falling off onto the table. Shadows hung in corners, shapeless but attentive. Eleanor's nightmares worsened, full of infinite mirrors and infinite Eleanors, every one of them caught in her very own bad dream. The voice from earlier came back, more distinct this time, whispering, "Choose. A life? A death?" Eleanor wasn't certain, but the word dug its way into her brain. She started feeling disconnected, as though her body wasn't even hers. Her image in the bathroom mirror, in the kitchen window, even on the spoon, they were all displaying flashes of these other Eleanors. The painter, the prisoner, the one racing through the trees. They were seeping into her life, their faces blurring into her own face. One evening, not quite able to withstand it, Eleanor went back down to the basement. The mirror remained waiting, its surface glinting in the faint illumination. She did not wish to look, but her feet moved of their own accord, compelled by an inexorable force. Her reflection materialized, but it was not hers. It was bound Eleanor, her wrists raw, her eyes wide with fear. The figure of shadows was closer, its knife upraised. Eleanor's actual hand brushed against glass, and for an instant she felt cold metal chains on her real wrists. The word grew to become a scream, and the mirror's face wrinkled like water. She drew back, her heart racing. The basement seemed smaller, air thick and full of something living. She hurried upstairs, shutting the door, but the humming remained closer than before. She blocked the basement door behind her with a chair, but it did not matter. The very house seemed to be shifting to accommodate the visions of the mirror. The walls tilted, shadows pulsed. Eleanor huddled on the couch, holding on to her notebook, her one lifeline to reality. She scribbled furiously in her notebook, attempting to decipher the visions it provided. The mirror revealed possibilities, she thought, but why were they dark ones? The chains, the flames, the nothing? Weren't they warnings, or were they unavoidable? She felt sick at the idea. She recalled Hargrove's statement. Mirrors don't lie. If what the mirror revealed was truth, then that chained Eleanor existed, somewhere, somewhen. And it was drawing nearer. By morning, Eleanor was drained, her eyes searing. She stood up, meaning to get coffee, but stood before the basement door instead. The chair was missing, the door open. She hadn't moved it. Her breath caught as she started down the stairs, the thrum drawing her like water. The mirror was waiting, its glass glowing subtly. Her reflection stared back, but it was the other Eleanor, the one bound, pleading, screaming. The dark figure was nearer, blade pressed against her throat. Eleanor's true hand extended, and glass seemed as soft as flesh. She recoiled, but the sight did not recede. The chained Eleanor glared at her, speaking words that Eleanor could not hear. The buzz was deafening, rattling her bones. She understood, with an icy, sinking fear, that the boundary dividing her reality from that of the mirror was dissolving. The visions were not mere possibilities. They were reaching toward her, reaching for her to be pulled into them. And something, or someone, was assisting them. Eleanor's reality began to unravel at the seams. Her home no longer existed as it once did. The walls appeared to change when she wasn't there, doorways to rooms that weren't there. The hum of the mirror was incessant now, a beat that was everywhere with her, at home, outside, even in her vehicle as she attempted to escape. She drove to the outskirts of town, ready to get as far away as possible, but the hum increased, and her reflection in the back of her vehicle showed chained Eleanor, crying to be let go. Eleanor turned back, quivering, knowing that she could not escape it. The mirror was at the center of everything to her now. She stayed clear of the basement, yet its presence filtered into every room like wet air. There were moving shadows at the edge of her sight, always disappearing upon turning to look. Things disappeared, her keys, her phone, her notebook to reappear where she hadn't put them. One time, she discovered her notebook on the kitchen table, open to one of its blank pages. Choose. The handwriting was not her handwriting. She attempted to break the mirror. With a hammer, she went downstairs to the basement, her determination fortifying her against the thrum. But as she brought up the hammer, her reflection moved, depicting her in a coffin, her face white, her arms crossed upon her breast. The image was so real that she let go of the hammer, her knees collapsing. The surface of the mirror rippled, and for an instant, earth and rot filled her nostrils. She rushed from it, closing the door, but the thrum mocked her, its sound like laughing, deep and scornful. Eleanor no longer ate, no longer slept. Her body was not her own, as if it were one of the other Eleanors. She noticed them everywhere, in puddles, in windows, in the glint of a knife. The painter, the doctor, the prisoner, they came and went, faces blurring into her own. The bound Eleanor was most prevalent, wrists raw, her eyes fixed on Eleanor's with an entreaty that brought tears to her chest. The figure in shadows was always near, closer every time, its knife glinting. She phoned Hargrove once more, her voice shaking. "It's taking me," she told him. He was quiet for an instant, then let out a deep sigh. "You stared for too long," he said again. "The mirror is not merely showing you, it is selecting for you. You need to turn from it, Eleanor. End the connection." When she questioned him on how, he paused. "You need to confront it. Enter into the vision. Select your reality, or it will select for you." Then he hung up, leaving her with more questions than solutions. She sat on the couch, her eyes fixed on the door to the basement. The whirring was now roaring, rattling the house. She understood that Hargrove was correct. She wouldn't be able to run. The mirror was no longer an outside force, its visions implanted in her brain. She needed to confront it, whatever that was going to be. Bracing herself, she made her way to the basement, her footsteps echoing in hollow beats. The mirror was waiting, its glass glowing abnormally bright. Her image was already there, the shackled Eleanor, the dark figure's knife to her throat. Eleanor pushed her hands into the glass, anticipating solidity. But it wasn't there. The surface gave, warm and yielding, like water. Her hands slipped into it, then her arms, her body sinking in as well. She pulled back, but the mirror tugged harder, and she slipped down. The world spun, and she was in chained Eleanor's reality. The room was cold, gritty, filled with the scent of rust and terror. Chains dug into her wrists, heavy and real. The figure of shadows hung there, still faceless, its blade pressed near her flesh. "Who are you?" Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling. The figure remained silent, but the hum grew, becoming a throng of voices, all of them saying, "Choose." She gazed about, and there was only darkness outside of the chair. Her reflection, the real Eleanor, flickered in the air, like a ghost hovering on the other side. The memories of the chained Eleanor came flooding back, a life of bad choices, bad fortune, and one moment of desperation that brought her to this room. This wasn't her future, it was someone else's current life. Eleanor concentrated on her ghostly image, willing herself back to reality. The hum struggled, the chains contracting. The figure of shadows moved closer, its breath on her neck, icy cold. She closed her eyes, envisioning her home, her existence, her reality. "I'm not this," she said, her voice strengthening. "I choose life." The hum stumbled, and the chains relaxed. She pushed against the pull of the mirror, feeling glass yielding once more. She collapsed back into the basement, gasping, the surface of the mirror becoming solid once more. Her reflection stood normal, but her wrists hurt, red marks receding into normal coloration slowly. The hum decreased, but not disappeared. She staggered up to the stairs, locked the door, her body shaking. She'd escaped, but not for long. The mirror wasn't done yet. It had let her go, but temporarily only. The visions remained, waiting, and the presence of the shadowed figure remained within her head. That evening, Eleanor dreamed of the mirror once more. She was in the hall of mirrors, and every one of them reflected a different Eleanor. The chained Eleanor was there, unshackled now, but wrong in her eyes, dark, hollow, like the figure of shadows. The voice spoke again, more distinct. "You chose, but it's not over." Eleanor woke up, her heart pounding. The basement door stood open, though she'd closed it up tight. The humming was back, loud, and she knew that mirror was waiting, its visions eager to draw her in once more. Eleanor realized that she could not battle the mirror indefinitely. Its allure was too great, its visions too tangible. The house was not a refuge, but a prison, its walls shutting in tighter by the day. The humming was an ambient thrum, a heartbeat that synchronized with her own. She felt the other Eleanors surrounding her, in glimmering windows, shiny doorknobs, the rim of her coffee cup. They were no longer distinct. They were now an extension of her, their lives bleeding into her like dye seeping into water. She attempted to escape, filling her duffel and driving toward the highway. But the mirror's power pursued her. The face in the side mirror of her car was that of the chained Eleanor, her face bruised, her eyes hollow. The drone covered up the radio, and Eleanor's hands trembled on the steering wheel. She turned round, beaten, knowing the mirror would not permit her to escape. The mirror had selected her, as Hargrove had predicted. Back home, Eleanor came to a decision. She could not break the mirror, and she could not escape. There was only one choice left, to go in. She took tools, a flashlight, knife, notebook, and made her way down to the basement. The mirror was waiting, its frame shiny as polished bone. Her image was already beginning to change, and it reflected Eleanor, chain, blade pressed to her throat, as before. But Eleanor's image did not change back this time. She pressed her hands against the glass, feeling it break, and walked in. The world beyond was hell on earth. The room was no longer just an idea, the chains an oppressive weight, air thick with the scent of blood and wet rock. The figure of darkness stood in front of her, face still obscured, presence still heavy as lead that pressed upon her chest. The HM was blinding, an army of voices crying, "Choose!" Eleanor's wrists bled, chains dug deep into her flesh. She searched for her reflection, the real Eleanor, but only darkness stared back at her. The figure lifted its blade, and Eleanor's fear transformed into clarity. The mirror was not merely revealing alternate lives to her, it was testing her. Every vision was an option, one to pursue or reject. The chained Eleanor was an admonishment, one of hopelessness that she might avoid. And yet, what of the figure? Her fear? Her indecision? Or something older, something attached to the mirror itself? She closed her eyes and visualized her own life, her true life. The house, the attic, the fresh beginning of which she dreamed. She imagined herself free, complete, unblemished by visions from the mirror. "I choose me," she said, her voice firm. The words slowed, chains releasing. The figure hesitated, its knife suspended. Eleanor pressed against that glass in her head, feeling it crack. She tumbled back into the basement, the surface of the mirror once more solid. Her wrists were unblemished, her body intact. The hum disappeared, the mirror still. Her reflection was normal, but she did not believe it. She took up the hammer, dismissed the flash of coffin sight, and struck. The glass shattered, every shard reflecting a different Eleanor, the painter, the doctor, the prisoner, before falling dark. The casing began to crack, the wood splitting, and a draft of cold air whipped into the basement, sweeping the hum away. Eleanor burned the frame in the backyard, observing as the flames destroyed the carved vines. The house was lighter, the air fresher. She slept that evening, dreamless for the first time in weeks. But the shadow of the mirror remained. She caught glimpses of other Eleanors reflected in windows, in water, in dreams. They were faint, but unmistakable, watching her back. Months passed, and Eleanor attempted to carry on. She restored the cottage, began to paint, took up work in town. She still avoided mirrors, covering them or positioning them against walls. She felt as though the power of the mirror still lingered, only sleeping. One day, while cleaning in the attic, she discovered a jagged, broken sliver of glass nestled in a corner. She hadn't left it there before. She took it up, and her reflection began to stare back, not that of the painter, nor of the captive, but of the figure in the shadows, its blade glinting. Eleanor threw down the shard, her heart pumping. She buried it deep under the earth in her garden, but she knew it would not be enough. The mirror was broken, but its truth endured. In another reality, perhaps, the chained Eleanor still shrieked, the figure of shadows still lingered. And Eleanor, real Eleanor, existed with the knowledge that perhaps her choice was not absolute. The mirror revealed to her what was true, not of other lives, but of the vulnerability of her own. She existed guardedly, always vigilant, always questioning if the buzz would recur.